I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I've always been careful with my belongings, especially the pieces of jewelry passed down from my grandmother. They're not the kind of things you can walk into a store and replace. My younger sister Harper is 26, and she has a long history of borrowing without asking. Sweaters, scarves, handbags, things would disappear from my place, and days or weeks later I'd see them sitting in her closet. When I'd point it out, she'd just laugh, say we were sharing, and keep moving like it wasn't a big deal. A month ago, my fiancé proposed. Between the engagement ring and the thought of upcoming family events, I became more protective of the valuables I already had. I reorganized my jewelry box, placing the most important pieces into a small, lockable case that I kept tucked in the back of my closet. The diamond studs from my grandmother were in there, simple, elegant, and something I planned to wear on my wedding day. 2 weeks later, I opened the case to get the studs for a dinner and found an empty slot. I pulled out every drawer in my jewelry box, went through my travel case, checked my purses, and even looked in the pockets of coats. Nothing. Harper had been the only person in my apartment that week. She'd come over to help me declutter before my future in-laws visited for the first time. She'd been in my bedroom, going through shelves and drawers while we chatted. When I brought it up, she smirked and told me I was probably being dramatic. I said the earrings were valuable and sentimental. She leaned against the counter and tossed out, "Freaking out won't bring them back," like it was a joke. I knew I hadn't misplaced them, but I also knew accusing her without proof would turn into a screaming match and a round of denial. I decided to keep my mouth shut for now and watch for an opening. Harper isn't careful when she slips up, and I've learned over the years that her own arrogance is usually what exposes her. That opening came faster than I expected. About a week later, she invited me to help her set up for her friend's engagement party at her apartment. She said she needed extra hands with the food and decorations. I figured it was a chance to keep an eye out, maybe catch something that told me more. When I arrived, she greeted me at the door with a glass of wine and led me straight to the kitchen. Her place was buzzing with last-minute prep, balloons in a corner, trays of appetizers half-finished, music playing low in the background. As I moved to set down my bag, something on the sideboard caught my eye, a small, ornate velvet pouch. It was identical to the one I used to keep my diamond studs in, same deep burgundy color, same drawstring, and even a small snag in the seam at the bottom. I didn't grab it right then. Instead, I asked about it casually while adjusting a platter. Harper glanced over and said it came from some old box she found in storage. Then she turned away to arrange wine glasses. I didn't push it. Later, while she was in the hallway taking a call, I opened the pouch. Inside were a pair of cheap costume earrings, nothing special. But that pouch had been in my apartment, in my closet. She could swap out the contents, but not the fact that it was mine. I slipped it back exactly as I'd found it and kept going with the night like nothing happened. Guests started arriving, and Harper shifted into hostess mode. As she passed out drinks, I noticed something else, a thin gold bracelet on her wrist. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to our mom. I'd seen it in my mom's jewelry box just a month ago. After the party, I called Mom to ask if she'd lent it to Harper. She hadn't. That told me this wasn't just me being targeted. Harper had a pattern of taking from everyone. I thought about confronting her, but I knew how that would go. She'd spin it, laugh it off, or outright deny it. Instead, I started turning over a different idea in my mind. I wanted her to feel exactly what I'd felt when I opened that case and saw the empty slot. The frustration of knowing something important was gone, and the insult of having it brushed off like it didn't matter. There was only one thing Harper owned that she treated like treasure, a signed first edition of her favorite childhood book. Our late aunt had given it to her years ago. She kept it in a glass display case in her bedroom, right where visitors could see it. She'd bragged about it at every opportunity, calling it priceless and irreplaceable. I'd seen it so many times I could picture the exact placement of the signature on the title page. And just like my earrings, it wasn't something you could pick up at the mall if it went missing. I didn't know the full plan yet, but I knew that book would be the key. What I needed was a way to make her lose it without actually taking it away forever. Something that would give her the same hollow, helpless feeling she'd given me. When I left her apartment that night, I glanced at the display case one more time. The book sat there under the warm light, untouched and secure in her mind. I smiled to myself. She had no idea that soon, she'd know exactly what it felt like to have something that important vanish right under her nose. Harper greeted me at her apartment door like nothing was wrong, smiling, holding a glass of wine, and pulling me inside before I could even take my coat off. Music was playing low in the background, and the smell of baked desserts drifted in from the kitchen. She said she had a few trays left to set out and needed me to help arrange them. I followed her toward the kitchen, passing the sideboard along the wall. That's when I noticed it, an ornate velvet pouch resting neatly near a stack of serving platters. Deep burgundy, soft texture, and right at the bottom edge, a tiny snag in the seam. The exact pouch I had kept my grandmother's diamond studs in, just like the one I'd already seen at her engagement party weeks earlier. My eyes stayed on it a second too long. As I moved a plate of cookies into position, I asked about it casually. Harper didn't even pause, just said it came from some old box she'd found while cleaning. She kept talking about the dessert table and went to the fridge for more food. I let her explanation slide in the moment, but I made a mental note to take a closer look. A few minutes later, she stepped away to greet a guest at the door. I opened the pouch quickly. Inside were a pair of cheap costume earrings, nothing special. But the pouch itself told the real story. It had been in my closet, holding my studs. Even without the earrings in it now, it confirmed what I already suspected. I put it back exactly how it was and moved on, keeping my face neutral. Harper bustled around, topping off drinks, greeting more guests, and laughing with her friends. I played along, taking coats, helping serve, chatting with people I didn't know. Later in the evening, while she was talking to someone across the room, I noticed the bracelet on her wrist. A delicate gold chain with a tiny heart charm, our mother's bracelet. I'd seen it countless times in Mom's jewelry box. It wasn't the kind of thing Harper could have bought recently, it had been around for years. After the last guest left and Harper started clearing up, I said goodnight and headed home. As soon as I walked in the door, I called Mom. I asked if she'd lent Harper the bracelet. She sounded confused and said she hadn't. That was the moment I knew for sure this wasn't just about me or my missing studs. Harper had a habit of taking from everyone, and she'd been getting away with it for a long time. I thought about confronting her, but I already knew how that would go. She'd laugh it off, deny it, twist it into something harmless. Even if I pressed, she'd manage to make herself the victim. I wasn't going to give her that chance. Instead, I started thinking about what mattered most to her, something she cared about enough to notice right away if it was gone. It had to be personal, irreplaceable, and impossible for her to brush off the loss. That's when I remembered the signed first edition of her favorite childhood book. It was a gift from our late aunt, and Harper treated it like it was a crown jewel. She kept it in a glass display case in her bedroom, angled under a small spotlight so the cover caught the light. She told anyone who visited about it. I'd heard her brag about how rare it was and how it couldn't be replaced for any amount of money. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed perfect. I wasn't planning to steal it for good, but if I could make it disappear temporarily, replace it with something that looked the same but wasn't signed, she'd get to experience exactly what it felt like when something valuable vanished without explanation. For the rest of the week, I kept my interactions with her light and normal. If she suspected I was onto her, the plan wouldn't work. I answered her texts like usual, made small talk on the phone, and even sent her a picture of a wedding dress I'd tried on to keep the focus on my upcoming plans. The idea stayed in the back of my mind though, growing clearer. If I wanted this to work, I'd have to find the right replacement book, something identical down to the edition and coverware, so she wouldn't notice until she opened it. That would give me time to keep the signed copy safe while she scrambled to figure out what had happened. I also knew I'd need the perfect opportunity, time alone in her place when she wouldn't be hovering nearby. Harper can be careless, but when it comes to that book, she's protective. I'd seen her move it out of reach when kids visited and wipe the cover with a soft cloth like it was glass. Getting to it without her noticing would take planning. Before the week was over, she gave me exactly what I needed without realizing it. She invited me over the following weekend for a quiet dinner, just the two of us, saying she wanted to try a new recipe. She mentioned she'd be cooking most of the afternoon and would probably take a shower right before I arrived. I agreed instantly, already picturing the display case in my mind. The pouch on her sideboard had been the first crack in the wall. Now I was ready to make it crumble. Harper's book had always sat in the same spot, center shelf in the glass display case in her bedroom, angled so the cover faced out under a small overhead light. She never locked the case, but she checked that book like some people check a front door before bed. Anyone who came over heard the story about how our late aunt gave it to her, how rare it was, how no one else she knew owned anything like it. She'd call it priceless, irreplaceable, one of a kind. The night of our dinner, I arrived right when she said to, just before she finished getting ready. Her hair was wrapped in a towel, and she waved me toward the living room while she went to change. I took my time walking down the hall, glancing into her bedroom as I passed. The display case was there, lit up like always. The book was still in perfect condition. That quick look confirmed everything I needed to know. I'd have no trouble getting to it. That same week, I searched online for the exact edition. After a few days of checking rare book listings and contacting specialist sellers, it took some searching, but I eventually found a copy through a collector once I narrowed it down to the publisher, year, and cover design. I found an identical copy, same binding, same printing, but without the signature. It was $60, and the seller shipped it within 2 days. When it arrived, I compared it side by side with photos I'd seen of hers. Unless you opened to the title page, you'd never know it wasn't the original. The next time she invited me over, I slipped the unsigned copy into my bag. We stood in the kitchen talking while she started a pot of coffee, her back to me as she searched for a mug in the top cabinet. She called out something from behind the counter, and I took the chance to step into the bedroom. The case opened with a simple pull. I swapped the books quickly, placing the signed one into a protective sleeve I'd brought and tucking it deep into my bag. I closed the case, lined the replacement up exactly the way hers had been, and walked back out before she turned around. By the time I left, the signed copy was already locked in my home safe, right next to my grandmother's necklace. It was secure, and more importantly, it was out of Harper's reach. The unsigned version looked so convincing that I knew she wouldn't notice immediately. It didn't even take 2 days. My phone rang, and when I answered, Harper's voice was tight. She said the signature had faded. She claimed she'd been showing the book to a friend when she noticed it didn't look right. I asked what she meant, and she went on about how the pen strokes were lighter, almost gone. She started talking about what it might do to the value, how it wouldn't mean the same thing anymore. I let her finish. Then I used her own line from when my earrings went missing. Well, getting upset won't bring it back. Silence on the other end. Then her voice came back sharper, accusing me of not understanding how important it was. I didn't respond beyond a simple acknowledgement and let the conversation end there. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I just let the weight of her own frustration sit where it landed. From that moment, I could already see the change starting. In the days that followed, she sent short, tense messages, nothing like her usual casual tone. She stopped sending random photos or updates about her day. Our mother mentioned Harper seemed distracted on the phone, bringing up the book more than once. I didn't plan to keep it forever. This was never about permanent loss. It was about the moment she realized something she thought was untouchable had been taken without her consent, and that no amount of brushing it off could make it feel better. The way she had made me feel when she told me to stop freaking out about my earrings. The plan was working, and the first signs were already showing. About a week after Harper first called about the faded signature, she rang again. This time she wanted to know if I had any contacts for rare book restorers. I told her I didn't and suggested she check through her old notes or receipts from when she'd had other collectibles appraised. She sighed and said the only restorer she trusted had moved across the country and now charged triple his old rates. From then on, she started bringing up the book to our parents every time she spoke to them. Mom told me later that Harper sounded upset, but kept circling back to the same point. that the book wasn't the same anymore and it felt like losing a part of our aunt all over again. Mom tried to comfort her, saying that sometimes sentimental things can't be replaced, no matter how much money you throw at them. Then Harper started hinting that someone might have swapped the book. She didn't name anyone directly at first, but she brought it up in a way that made it clear she was fishing for a reaction. When she mentioned it to me, I asked who could even get close to it. That's when she admitted she'd never locked the display case because she trusted the people who visited her apartment. I kept my face neutral while she talked, though inside I almost laughed at the irony. She was describing exactly the same situation I'd been in with my earrings, no proof, no locked case, just the trust that nothing would go missing. A few days later, Dad mentioned in passing that Harper hadn't been sleeping well. He'd spoken to her late one night and heard her pacing in the background. She told him she couldn't stop thinking about the book and what had happened to it. I made sure to keep our own conversations light. I didn't bring up the book unless she did, and when she did, I let her do most of the talking. The less I said, the more she seemed to fill the silence with her own worries. At a family dinner that weekend, Harper showed up looking tired. Her hair wasn't styled like usual, and she barely touched the food on her plate. When the conversation turned to work and plans for the summer, she interrupted to say she'd been contacting auction houses for advice. She wanted to know if the signature could be restored, or if there was a way to verify its authenticity again. One of the auction houses told her flatly that the signature hadn't faded at all. According to them, the book in her possession wasn't the same one she'd originally had, it was a different copy entirely. That night, after everyone had gone home, I got a message from her. Just 3 words, someone stole my book. I read it, locked my phone screen, and set it down without replying. 2 days after she sent the late-night message, Harper asked me to meet her for coffee. She was already seated when I arrived, a stack of papers beside her cup. As soon as I sat down, she slid one across the table. It was a printed photo of the signed page from years ago, taken when our aunt had first given her the book. She tapped at the image, then pulled the current copy from her bag and opened it to the same page. She pointed out differences in the paper's texture, the ink's depth, the way the light caught on the strokes. She had clearly been studying it. I asked why she was showing me this. Harper explained that I was the only person besides her friend Jenna who had been inside her apartment recently. She said Jenna would never take something so personal, but didn't accuse me directly, only letting her eyes flicker toward me briefly, as if weighing the thought. I reminded her of when my grandmother's diamond studs disappeared, and she told me I was overreacting, that maybe I'd misplaced them. Maybe, I said. She had done the same thing with her book. Her jaw tightened, and she told me I didn't care about what she'd lost. I stood, told her she'd figure it out eventually, and walked out without waiting for her to follow. From then on, she began sending me messages almost daily. Some were long, explaining how much the book meant to her and asking if I'd help her track down who might have taken it. Others were short, sharp bursts of irritation, accusing me of not supporting her, of staying too quiet, of avoiding her calls. I kept my responses brief. One-word answers, polite acknowledgments, nothing to invite more conversation. A week later, Mom mentioned over the phone that Harper had been crying during their last call. She said Harper told her it felt like losing the one thing that mattered most and that she didn't think she'd ever get it back. Dad added his own observation. Harper had canceled a group outing they'd planned because she didn't feel up to it. He said she seemed distant, distracted, like she couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. It was clear her mind was fixed entirely on that missing signature. The energy she once spent on gossip or planning weekend trips was now poured into rehashing the same mystery over and over. Still, she hadn't made the connection between her current obsession and the way she'd brushed off my missing earrings. That was the point. This was never about her figuring it out too soon. It was about her living in the same limbo I'd been forced into. And for now, she was right where I wanted her. A few days later, I sent Harper a message inviting her to lunch. I picked a quiet place downtown, somewhere without too much noise or distraction. She showed up 10 minutes late, sunglasses on, phone in her hand like she was waiting for a call she couldn't miss. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she looked like she hadn't slept much. Once we were seated, I reached into my bag and slid a small gift bag across the table toward her. She glanced at it, then opened it slowly. Inside was a velvet jewelry pouch, the exact kind I used to keep my grandmother's diamond studs in. Same deep color, same frayed seam along the edge. She held it in her hand for a long moment, then looked at me, waiting. I told her I'd found it while cleaning and thought she might want it. Her expression tightened, but she didn't say anything about where it had come from or why it was now in my possession. She set it on the table beside her water glass and asked how wedding plans were going, steering the conversation away. I answered briefly, then steered it right back to the topic of personal belongings, how people should respect the things that aren't theirs. She shifted in her seat, the corners of her mouth pulling in. She said she'd never taken anything of mine that mattered. I leaned forward slightly and asked if she was sure about that. Her eyes flickered for just a second before she looked away. I told her that one way or another, she'd figure it out, just like I'd figure out what happened to my earrings. She pushed her plate away without taking more than a bite and said she needed to leave. She stood, tucked the pouch into her bag, and walked out without looking back. From my seat, I watched her cross the street, her shoulders tense and her steps quicker than usual. The velvet pouch was a small thing, but it was a thread pulled from a much larger knot. I could see it in the way she carried herself. She was starting to connect dots she didn't want to admit were there. This wasn't just about the book anymore. The pouch was a reminder that she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. It was proof that I could reach into her space the same way she had reached into mine. And now the tension between us wasn't just unspoken, it was visible, hanging in every pause and every glance. That was exactly where I wanted her before the final reveal. 2 weeks went by without a single direct word from Harper. The only updates came through my parents, Mom mentioning Harper was still upset about her mystery theft, Dad saying she'd been quiet and withdrawn. Then Mom decided we should all have Sunday lunch together, claiming it had been too long since we'd sat down as a family. I agreed, knowing Harper would be there. Before leaving the house, I slipped the signed book into my bag. When I walked into the dining room, Harper was already seated, her eyes on her plate, barely looking up as I took my seat. The table was set with roast chicken, potatoes, and a bowl of salad in the center. Conversation started lightly, Dad talking about his garden, Mom asking about work, but the tension at the table was impossible to miss. Halfway through the meal, Harper broke the silence about her book. She said she still didn't know who had taken it but was certain she hadn't misplaced it. Dad put down his fork and asked if she was accusing someone sitting there. Harper's eyes flicked to me, then away again. I reached into my bag and set the signed first edition in the middle of the table. The signature was clear under the light. Harper's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto her plate. She stared at the book without moving. I told her I'd kept it safe to show her exactly what it feels like when something valuable is taken and then dismissed as unimportant. Mom looked between us, asking what I meant. I turned to Harper and asked if she still thought I'd misplaced my grandmother's diamond studs. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't answer. I told her I didn't expect the earrings back, only that now she knew what it was like. Dad spoke up, saying this never would have happened if she'd respected other people's belongings from the start. Harper didn't argue. She pulled the book toward her and kept her gaze on the table. The rest of the meal passed in near silence, the clink of cutlery louder than any conversation. When I left, there was no apology, but there was no denial either. The message had landed, and I was certain she'd think twice before taking anything that didn't belong to her again.